Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. That is today on a Tuesday, 13th day of August 2024. Going to be reading from a book by Alvin Kuhn called simply The Lost Life. And it's a pretty long book. So we're just basically going to take maybe what I call chapter by chapter here. I don't know if many people know basically who Alvin Kuhn is. Probably the most prolific writer on esoteric Christianity in last century. Basically, he was born in the late 1800s. He was a student of Gerald Massey and basically lived to 1963. And I think he's written close to 45 or 50 books. Some of those books you can still get today. Is well worth the time to read those to enlighten your spiritual walk. So we're going to get into it, and we're just going to start out with basically what this is all about. Uh, Alan Boyd Kuhn has written, I'll just say this, the following works is that the mighty symbol of the horizon, nature as symbol, the tree of knowledge, the rebellion of the angels, the ark and the deluge, the true meaning of Genesis, the law of the two truths, at sixes and sevens, Adam old and new, the real and the actual immortality. Yes, but how? The mummy speaks at last, symbolism of the four elements. Where are we at here? Through science to religion, creation in 6 days. Rudolf Steiner's Mystery of Golgotha, Krishnamurti and Theosophical, that is. And The Lyre of Orpheus, which unfortunately I don't think I've found it. And there's another unpublished autobiography called The Great Pan Returns. It's just some of the works. They're more than that, folks. It's just a deal. So his preface here simply says, the memory of Dr. Robert Norwood, who charged to me to write this. The prologue, and then we go into what I call, we'll hopefully go through the first chapter, called simply Tragedy Dies in Laughter. The prologue, coming forth in a day when theology has long been discredited, even in its own ecclesiastic household, and religion itself is threatened with obliteration by rapid forces hostile to it. This book aims to rehabilitate theology and to stabilize true religion. It must be said at the very outset and with blunt insistence that it is for religion, not in any way against it. It is written to establish religion again as the cornerstone of human culture, when civilization has largely turned away from it to seek elsewhere their guiding light. It is designed to redeem divine theology from her outcast condition and place her again beside philosophy and science on the throne of the kingdom of man's mind. It needs sharply to be asseverated that the book is for religion because many will pronounce it the most forthright attack on ecclesiastic doctrinalism yet presented. It can hardly be denied that it sweeps away almost the entire body of common acceptance of biblical and theological meaning. But it makes no war on anything in religion save the ideologies and the falsities that have crept into the general concept or conception of orthodox belief. Finding the chief enemies of true religion were those within her own gates. The book has had to address itself to the ungenerous task of repudiating the whole untenable structure of accredited interpretation in order to erect on the ground the lovely temple of ancient truth. If theology is to be rescued from its forlorn state of intellectual disrepute, into which not its enemies but its friends have precipitated it through a unconscionable perversion of its original significance to gross repulsivism, the errors and distortions perpetrated upon it by those of its own household must be ruthlessly dismantled. Hence, to many, the book will seem like a devastating assault on the very citadel of common religious parchment, or preachment, I should say. In the face of all this, it must be maintained that the work is written to support and defend religion against all its foes, and that it is constructive and not destructive of true religious values at every turn. It was no light or frivolous gesture to affront a settled and rooted group of beliefs and doctrinal statements that have been cherished for centuries around the hearthstone of Christian culture, became hallowed by age-long acceptance and the strong loves and loyalties inbred in sensitive childhood. But it was seen to be a drastic operation quite necessary to save the organism of religion itself from further decay and menacing death. Its Christianism of misconception and superstition had to be heroically cut out of the body of theology, and the calcareous incrustations of ignorant interpretations dissolved and carried away by the by the acid stream of living truth flowing forth after centuries of suppression from the mighty scriptures of the past. And I'm not going to go into more on that. This is going to be elongated here, so we just get to the meat of the body here, of the work here. And he's basically just saying simply that we got an issue here. That Christianity has gotten away from what it used to be. It's just about beliefs. So let's see if we can get to the chapter 1 here. And bear with me. Like Shakespeare's tide, which taken at the flood, leads on to fortune, but amid, wait a minute, hold on a second here. Problem here, it's not coming up right. Bear with me here. It's laid out a little bit different than I'm used to. So let's see if we can do this thing a little bit differently. Let's go with what they call tragic dies in laughter. The name of the chapter. Okay, we got to chapter 1 here. Sorry, I had to scroll down page by page here. Little could the ancient mythologists and sages have foreseen that the, quote, fabulous narrations, end quote, which their genius devised to cloak high truth would end by plagiarizing the mind of the Western world with 16 centuries of unconscionable stultification. They could not possibly imagine that their allegorical construction to dramatize spiritual truth would so miscarry from their hidden intent as to cast the mental light of half the world for ages under the cloud of the most grotesque superstitions known to history. Nor could they have dreamed that the gross blindness and obtuseness of later epochs would cite these same marvelous, ingenious portrayals as the evidence of childish cruelty on the part of their formulators. Who could have suspected that the body of the most signal instrumentalities for conveying and preserving deep knowledge ever devised by man would become the means of centuries of mental enslavement? Nothing more clearly evidences the present age loss of fixed moorings in philosophical truth than the inconsistencies of its attitudes towards the sacred scriptures of antiquity. The general mind, that is indoctrinated by priestcraft, regards them as infallible revelations and holds them as fetishes, which were a sacrilege to challenge. In other words, it would be, why do you challenge this, so to speak? Who are you? This is God's word, so to speak. While theological scholarship hedges from pious veneration of them over to outright skepticism of the divine origin, swinging more recently to a view which takes them to be the simple conceptions of men just emerging from cave and forest barbarism. So those who come in here and see these things are coming in with somewhat of a preconception, and they prove that simply, it's not important, or it's superstition, so to speak. It's child's play, sort of a child's talk. It's just but most people don't realize simply it is a story, and it also has what we call deepness in it. But unfortunately, we are unable to go in that depth as what it was, thousands of years ago. The character of divine dictation and absolute wisdom assigned to them on the one thesis has yielded to that of ignorant speculation of primitive folk on the other. You see, that there is a possible truer characterization of them lying midway between the extravagance of these two extreme views has not seemed to come through to intelligence at any time. It has not occurred to students of religion that ancient scripts are the work neither of supreme deity on the one side, nor of groping infantile humanity on the other, but that their production must be sought in the region intermediate between the two. They came neither from the supernatural deity nor from the common humanity, but from humanity divine lies. They were the output of normal human graduating to divine or near divine status. St. Paul, quote, just men made perfect, end quote. Their divinity is therefore not transitive and exotic, and their humanity is not crude and doltish. They bear the marks, therefore, of human sacristy, exalted to divine mastership. When a student graduates credibly from a college, he is presumed to have acquired a mastery over the field of knowledge covered in his course. Even life is a school, and why should not its graduates be presumed to have gained mastery over the range of knowledge which it covers, and to be able to write authoritarianly upon it? Humans must at some time attain the goal, the prize of the high calling of God in Christly illumination, the crown of glorious intelligence. Life school issues no diploma of graduation without attainment. The graduation is the attainment. We have here the ground for the only sane acceptance of the ancient scriptures as books of accredited wisdom. We are neither asked to believe them inscribed by the fingers of omnipotent deity, nor forced to attribute them to the undeveloped brains of primitives. They can be seen as the product of the sage wisdom garnered by generations of men who had finally risen to clear understanding. They are the literal heritage bequeathed by men grown to the stature of divinity. Their veneration by the world for long centuries even carried to the extreme of outrageous syntheses, attesting as indestructible tradition of their origination from sources accredited as divine and infallible. Their successful hold on the popular mind for many ages bespeaks also the unshakable foundation of their wisdom. They have withstood consistently the test of generations of human experience. Their wisdom holds also against life. It rings true. And it is all the more precious to us because of its authorship by men of our own evolution, since thereby it does not miss immediately pertinence to our life. Both the conventional view of Bible authorship has militated, that is, against the possible high service of the scriptures to mankind. The theory of the divine dictation to, quote, holy men of old, end quote, has led to the abject surrender of the rational mind. Yes, these were great men, such and such, and we must honor them and bow down, so to speak. That's just again the whole idea that people think the perspective here is looking at it literal, and he also put what I call a historical perspective on it, meaning simply this is all history. Okay, so let's remind ourselves here clearly that the Bible is not talking about history, folks. It's just not. Uh, it's talking in ways of riddles to us. There's wisdom in it, but unless you have the ears to hear, you don't understand what they're talking about. And so most people don't. 99.9% of the people don't understand that. So what happens is simply is they go to someone who's been trained in a seminary in order to quote unquote tell them what it's talking about. Unfortunately, the seminaries don't teach anything either. They just basically teach okay, this is what happened, and again, it's historical and it's tradition and it's literal. And so what happens simply is there's no spirit in the word. You see, it's dead. So both the conventional view of Bible authorship has milited against the possible high service of the scriptures to mankind. The theory of their divine dictation to holy men of old has led to the abject surrender of the rational mind before their impregnable forces of this direct assertion. It hypnotization by a fetish and the crippling of its native energies. The theory of their production by early crudity tends to the disparagement of the value and validity of their message. The other view here advanced preserves their venerated authority while it brings their authorship from alleged cosmic divinity back to men of earth. It saves us from the fatuous claim that, quote, God, end quote, took time out to dictate a volume of absolute verity for the inhabitants of a minor planet among millions of trillions of such worlds. Correct. Yeah. God didn't dictate all this. Okay. This is what another thing. This is what divinely inspired is another thing. Let's see. God is not writing each word down and shooting it through these people's heads. Okay, which is what they teach you in seminary. Because I went to seminary. Relieving us of the necessity of asserting that supreme deity went into the book publishing business on this globe and took advantage of his commanding position to write the planet's, quote, bestseller, end quote. It preserves mental integrity by enabling us to assign scriptural authorship to human agency, where alone it is acceptable. It is understandable that evolved men with vision open to knowledge of the laws of life would indict sage tomes for the enlightenment of those less advanced. In any case, the Bibles are here. They must be accounted for. The phenomenon of their existence among the nations, their hoary age, their escape from destruction through the centuries, the ineradicable tradition of their divine origins and authority, their almost universal veneration, most all find some factual ground of explanation. The theory offered in refutation of the two conventional ones seems the only one that provides such a rational and acceptable basis. And since the belief in their sacredness generally persists, it cannot be regarded as less than momentous that the world should know of a surely that. While these revered relics are not the voice of the personified cosmos, neither are they the more what we call mere speculative romancing of cavemen or scholastics. They are the sure word of perfected wisdom. There was a time then in early human history when enlightenment men possessed true knowledge, the passport to wisdom. That's why I always point out something. Knowledge that is true knowledge leads to wisdom. Okay, meaning simply that knowledge, has to be correct in order to lead to wisdom. It's like a step-by-step approach because you need knowledge. You need to know. If you don't know, you can't get to wisdom. It's just a step, or steps, I should say. Clear and concise answers to the profoundest problems of philosophy were known. insofar as the human intellectual faculty is capable of it. A understanding of the mystery and riddle of life itself and the laws of evolutionary unfolding was achieved by men who, as Hermes says, had been, quote, reborn in mind, end quote. Philosophy was no mere speculative enterprise, end quote, or tilting at logical windmills. It was a statement of the fundamental archaic or basic principles of the science of being. It formed the groundwork for the elevation of theology to its true place as the king of science, or the kingly science. Together, philosophy and theology held the throne in the mental life of mankind, and and justly so, for a reason which modern thought would do well to consider. They must ever be to the ultimate science because they motivate finally the use we make of all other sciences. They hold final answers to all life's problems. They are the determination of all human action in the end. They alone can direct man finally to the path of good, for by no other means can he learn to know what constitutes the good. The sore need, that is the sore need, I should say, of the world today is the restoration of philosophy to supply the proper motivation and end of action. Through zealous, guarded from the unworthy by its accredited custodians, knowledge was extended to the ancient day. Modern zeal for zeal for publicly found it hard to understand why it was so seductious kept esoteric, and esoteric simply means hidden. Briefly, for the full reason is a lengthy matter. A thing so precious, the distillation of ages of experience and the deposit of many lives of painful earnings could not be given out loosely to the undisciplined rabble to be violated and despoiled. True. Yes, that's correct. And what they're saying simply is that, let's say, for example, you run a company such and such, and so you want to you have to have a couple of people working for you. So what you're looking for is people who have some experience and know how to deal with the public. In other words, they have to have the proper attitudes and how to explain certain things to the public that they're working to sell a product. If they don't, they can actually, destroy the what we call the reputable recognition of the customer, or in a ways being not able to help them, meaning that simply they would go somewhere else. Hold on just a second here. I forgot to get water here, so it's my fault. So it's just you don't give a position to someone who can destroy your business. Okay. So no bars of bigotry or persecution indicted its free culture. The societies in which it was secretly pursued were honored by kings and the populace alike. That is, the Herculean age passed. The priceless legacy of knowledge was threatened with extinction. Its pursuits were forbidden. Its devotees assailed and exterminated. And for more than 15 centuries, the Occidental world has muddied through its age-to-age existence in nearly total ignorance of the fact that antiquity held in its philosophy and theology an adequate answer to the great interrogatory, the Sphinx riddle of human life. The gift and then the loss of primal wisdom are the two most momentous events in human history. This age will be spectacular to the third most significant event, the renaissance of ancient culture, the plans of demigods and divine men, interrupted for 15 centuries of the Dark Ages, will move forward again towards destined goals. This age faces the announcement of a drama the like of which has not been unrolled in world history before and will hardly be repeated in aeons. Tragedy and comedy being copiously mixed in mortal existence, the astounding spectacle to which the world will shortly awake will exhibit untold calamity and ludicrous conjoined in incredible fashion. We are destined soon to pass from a stumbling sense of tragedy that is tragic as lost to the world echoing burst of laughter. The sting of our realization of our duo millennial loss will melt away under the dawning recognition of our previous unbelievable stupidity. We are in a little time to be made acutely aware of a situation that will become the butt, B-U-T-T, of hollow mirth for ages to come. Other egregious follies of history can be accepted or extenuated to the point of being condoned and forgotten. But this colossal ineptitude, prolonged over 16 centuries, cannot escape being laughed at for centuries more. A joke owes its character to the miscarriage of the intended sense in something ludicrously different. This announcement will stand as the historical joke of the ages. No less than this quality of hilarity can balance the weight of the tragedy which loads the joke at the other end, or the ludicrous different direction in which the intended sense of the great mythical religions and dramatic rituals of the past took its perverted course entailed as a consequence of the greatest of all historical tragedies, the frightful chapter of religious bigotry and persecution. You don't have any idea. I studied church history over 20 some years ago. Okay. And I made this point many times when I was at seminary and talked about it. So tell me, professor, in church history, why did the Protestants pursue the Anabaptists and killed them? Well, they were living in a different age, such and such, and they were different types of men. No, sorry, I don't work. Okay, but this is what I was being taught. You see, no, that's not a good enough excuse, because the reality simply is the truth is that the Protestants didn't know any more about truth than the Catholics did. Okay, and I'm not saying the Anabaptists knew everything needed. I'm not saying that either. But my point simply is that was in the 1500s, early 1500s, when the Anabaptists who looked at Scripture, they were still looking at it literally. Okay, but they were looking at what they call simply the New Testament. So they were looking at Jesus being an example of how we should live. And so that's how they lived their lives. It's a very simple perspective, a way of looking at things. I'm not putting them down. That's not the point. My point simply is that if you quote unquote are a disciple of Christ or you're a Christian, then you need to live that life. And that means simply you're not shaped by others, that basically you see what I would call condemning other groups, meaning that you're willing to kill them. And yet, if I go back even further back in early church history, which I did take early church history, the patristic era, we find that Augustine was one of the ones who began this whole crap. Okay, he's the one who dealt with certain groups that he felt were quote heretics. It's a great word. Heretic is talk about heresies. They chose what was quote unquote what is theologically doctrinal or dogma to make it okay, but it's all done in man's eye. You see, it's all done by man's own intellect. It had nothing to do with any type of experience that took place with them. Because, even though Augustine claimed to have some type of experience, all you have to do simply is look at, okay, so what? You had experience. Where's the difference here? You see. And Augustine came from background of what we call Manichaeism. So his struggle was simply, as I've shared many times, with the body. Okay. In other words, he and the spirit. So you had these are two dualities, which is true. The body and its functions, and the spirit. And so we talk about simply as well, you have to have water and food, such and such, in order to have life. You had to have shelter in order to have life, such and such, and be protected from the weather and all kinds of other things out there that could actually cause harm to you. But he seemed to lose the perspective simply is that he would think simply he was doing, having something to do with spirit was to do, in the flesh, which reality simply is that we are all spirits, all of us, every one of us on this planet are spirits. And we come from God, all of us, no matter what you believe, whatever. And the problem simply is there's a fight, there's a war going on in our minds, in our bodies, so to speak, and it's all to do with the flesh. And it's sexual gratification, so to speak. In other words, seeking whatever's for me, only about me, you see, which is pertinent in our age now enormously, which is a completely bankrupt perspective. But back to Augustine, he struggled with that. And so when he began to write dogma and doctrines and all this stuff, which is considered, a very quote unquote wise person, uh, he began to aim his folly or teachings to those who didn't agree with him, and began to say, well, then they're not worthy of being alive. And, you already crossed the proverbial. You've made a major mistake. And so this is and I've said this many times. The point simply is Augustine is considered, and this is why the church has never got its act together, because Augustine is considered father of all these three major groups: the Protestants, um, the Catholics, and also the Eastern Orthodox. All the Eastern Orthodox is not quite as much as the other two groups. So this is why you go back to this Anabaptist group. So what's the threat here? Why, as a Protestant or a Catholic, would be fearful of a small group called the Anabaptists? Okay. Why would you be fearful? If you had the truth, why would you be fearful? It reveals simply is that they didn't have the truth. See, it's a logical way of looking at this. You come to the point simply saying, oh, well, we were against this group, such and such. Well, then why are you fearful of this? Obviously, you didn't have any type of enlightenment to Scripture. You're just following man's rules of what you think God is about. And they're all fallacies. You never had experience at all. You never had any what we call the experience simply is that you meet God within your own self, you see. And so that's a fallacy. It's right there. And this is what the problem with people don't understand. They can't break it down. And it's sad. But the point simply is that, okay, so you claim you're a Christian, but basically you don't live a Christian life. Okay? And that realizes that nothing happened to you. Nothing. You think you have. You go to church and you think you have, but nothing's really happened to you. You see. You claim to such and such, but then you're stealing from your boss, or stealing from someone else, or you're causing harm to other people. So you're not any different than those who are sinners, because you are a sinner. You just think you are a Christian. And there's another misnomer out there. It's really critical for people to understand, is that we're supposed to make heaven that is for ourselves. In other words, we're here to create heaven within ourselves, meaning basically having a spiritual experience, a true spiritual experience that we actually have. Esoterically, that is, meaning within ourselves, not outside ourselves, but within ourselves. And the only one who would know that would be you, because you're the only spirit. You're the only one that met God. Okay, so you don't meet God at the altar. Okay, you don't meet God when you say, "I want to be a Christian," because you're following man's dictates. They're not. If it's man's dictates, it has nothing to do with God, because man's dictates are inferior to God. It always will be, because who created you? Who gave you life? Well, you say, well, my mother, such as, no. Let's go further back, folks. You are from God. You are a spirit. You're just carrying a flesh. You're carrying a body in order to live in this particular reality called Earth. And so, in a way, going back to the whole thing with the Christianity stuff, is that it's an enormously deceptive deal. It has truths in it, but it's not realized because no one has actually experienced anything really. And if you claim you have, you better be able to back it up because your life will change. If not, there was no substance to whatever you did. Because that's the evidence that must be in your life. And I'm not there neither. I'm talking about things that simply I'm learning these things from Phil Langdon, who shared these things. But there's also been the path I've been on. My path is different than Phil Langdon's. Phil Langdon comes from a logical perspective, being to do with science and psychology. Mine is coming from a social science and also doing with religion. So there's a different, way of looking at it. I'm not saying I'm right all the time. I'm not. But I am saying that Phil Langdon had experience, and he is an angel, and that's why I share this information, because he's actually, bestowed upon me deeper teachings, and so I want to know more about what happened to him and what makes him different and what makes him tick. So that's what's important. So anyway, kind of got off track here. So, but it was basically here what I was talking about. Simply, this worst of all forms of man's inhumanity to man was bred out of the miscarriage of the conceited or concealed meaning of the ancient spiritual myth. The transaction carried the form of a joke, but it also carried the substance of the most appalling terrorism in history. And the most calamitous of all blunders was the mistaken religious myth, drama, and allegory for vertical history. Yes, because the scriptures is about religious myth. It is about dramas and allegories. It is the three stages. There are three stages, three steps in a drama, so to speak, by the Jewish people, the Jewish movie makers. Hold on a second here. So let's continue on with what Alvin Boy Kuhn's sharing. Now, I'm not going to make any. I'm going to tell you also that Alvin Boy Kuhn never had as far as I can tell, experience. But he breaks down what he sees simply going on by what he's seen in the Egyptian thing. He's actually, again, like I said, a student of Gerald Massey. And the Egyptians obviously were the last great, quote unquote, civilization on this planet. Yes, we talk about Greek, we talk about Roman, but the problem is simply the Greeks and Roman basically take things from Egypt. That's what they do. They pulled it and then they make it their own. You see, then they claim, oh, we have the truth, such and such. All right. Everyone does that. Every country that comes along takes over another country. What they do is to institutionalize the citizens, because what they want to do is they want to break their history from the past of what they were. It's a way of breaking down a society. Let's continue. The promise of our coming awakening lies in the progress made and to be made in the study of comparative religion. So what he's saying simply is this is a comparative religion, such and such will lead you. Okay, let's look back at other groups, such and such, and what it's about. So comparatively mythology and comparatively theology. What they will ere long make clear to us beyond further dispute is the almost unthinkable fact that for 16 centuries the best intelligence of the West took the ancient sages, that is the books of wisdom, which were in all cases the spiritual dramatizations of the experience of the human soul on earth, for objective historical narrative. And so this is why they keep going back, looking for, Sodom and Gomorrah, when Sodom and Gomorrah is actually another word for what's in your head. Two separate parts of you, the divided self, in your mind, the masculine and the feminine part, so to speak. How one is intellectual, logical, such and such, and the other one is enjoying life in itself and seeing the beauty of what's around, which is far more to do with the feminine part. Neither one is any better than the other, but you need both of them, you see. Where are we at? The spectacle that will soon throw a world first into wonder, confusion, and dismay, and then into cloudish laughter, is that of the civilization covering 1/3 of the globe and boasting itself as the highest in culture in the historical period, all the while taking its moral and spiritual guidance for eon from a book or books of the true content and meaning of which it never for a moment had the slightest inkling. The blind leading the blind. The superior knowledge vouchsafed from every graduate in life school to disciplined pupils in the mysteries of old was transmitted from generation to generation by oral teaching and preserved only in memory. It wasn't written down, folks. See, because once it got written down, it could be taken and mislead people. You see, you had what we call a teacher who would teach you these things orally, that you eventually figure this stuff out. But later, lest it be lost or corrupted, it was consigned to writing. So this is what they did. Hence came the sacred books, the scripture, the holy writ of antiquity. So highly were they held in the esteem of early men that when in latter days, their true origin and character had been forgotten. So what happened, they got the words, but they don't have what I call the lore of what it was really talking about. You see, they lost the gist of the scriptures. It became dead. It became dead. The words are dead. There's no longer the spirit in it. They were exalted to the position of veritable fiducious and assigned a quite paternal nature, source, and rating. Regarding as books of superhuman intelligence, men have in face of them practically set in abeyance their human reason and bowed to them at the oracles of absolute truth. This was natural and to a degree inedible, but it spelled the catastrophe to the general mental life of man by fixing upon him the basis hypnotization in all the annuals of record, when a literal and historical instead of a purely spiritual and typical interpretation of the books were broadcast to general acceptance. The evidence is mountain high that the taking of ancient ritual dramas and scriptural myths for objective history and the figures in them for human persons has been the fountain source of the most abject corruption of man's mental forces since the race began. And yesterday, I was sharing this book, Metaphysics. This little book here has gems in it. It does. And this book was probably written in the 1920s or 1930s by this gentleman named Mr. Douglas, R.C. Douglas. And he conveys what these true meanings of the words are. So obviously, did he have the total truth? I doubt it, but he did actually understand that Scripture was speaking not literally. And this is what everybody's doing, is simply they're looking at a literal Jesus, they're looking at a literal Moses and literal Noah, and all this stuff. In reality, there's no. So there was no Moses, no. But then those words, Moses and Noah, have significance in where they land. Anyway, the evidence of Mount High that the taking of ancient rituals, already we did that, okay. In mechanical exploit, this is an age of marvel, and credit for this type of achievement should not be withheld. In study of life and its objective powers, it has labored with wondrous accomplishments. In psychological delving into deeper phases of consciousness, it has begun a pursuit long neglected. But in religion and philosophy, it is one of the blindest of ages. It is not overstating the case to state that in these areas of human enterprise, the mind of this era still slumbers in a state of ineptitude and gross darkness, at least a degree or two below that commonly termed barbaric. At this moment, the common mentality of the day, led and fed by a completely institutionalization ecclesiastical power, stands committed to ideas as to the origin, structure, meaning, and destiny of life, which have not been surpassed in cruelty and absurdity by the tribes of the forest and the sea islands. Conception and theology having to do with basic reality of man's relation to the universe are still presented in pulpits, Sunday schools, and theological seminaries, which the uncorrupted native intelligence of children of 8 and 10 years shrinks from or accepts with startled dismay to the subsequent confusion of their whole mental integrity. A, quote, scheme of the explanation of cosmic processes and world design, of human and angelical relations, of the plan and purport of life itself, in advance for popular acceptance, yet is grotesque to common sense and fantasticity to rational thought. Philosophy and religion are still propagated on the basis of a theology that is received without understanding by the quote common people, end quote, entirely repudiated by the intelligentsia and brazenly disassembled by the very priesthood that lifts it cantos and oracles from Sunday to Sunday. Nothing's changed at all, folks. That's why I spoke out about the book that Tom wrote. I'm trying to think his last name right now. I did a couple of weeks ago. He keeps thinking the church is going to change, and I'm like, no, it's going to have to die. It's going to have to wither away. Something else has got to spring up from a seed, from a different seed. Okay, the church is not. The church will never see this. They won't. They'll never give into it neither. Too much power, too much money, too much prestige, so to speak. Can't admit that we made a mistake. In some, it can be said without the remotest possibility of successful dispute that the general grasp of the mind of this age on philosophical verity and the truth of life as profited by Orthodox religionism is still steeped in the crassest forms of dark superstition. This has been due to the miscarriage of ancient symbolism. History would seem to present a pattern of retrogressive current if it can be shown that this late epoch grovels in a mire of semi-barbaric philosophical grossness from which a former period was free. Degeneracy must have set in at some distant time and swept onward to this day, and such a phenomenon must have had its due course. A great work of a learned author some years ago pointed out to the approaching decline of the West, end quote. What has not been seen, however, is that the West has long been in decline, is at a low stage of decay, and has not risen out of the marks or murks of the Dark Ages. This has come in the wake of causes long operative in the world situation, which have been overlooked or failed of discovery through a rigorous obscuration of the vision of scholars since the early centuries. So this is something that's been propagated for thousands of years, you see. And no one's come to the truth. If some people have come to, there have been very few. And if this failure of insight is not to be attributed to stupidity, that it is itself beyond understanding, then it becomes necessary for the historian of these things to posit for it another cause, one that casts the dark shadow of the sinister motive over the whole course of that historical enterprise, in which Senator's motive is of all places most unpardonable. Corruption in politics or in economics or social life can be understood in relation to the imperfections of human nature, and in a measure, pardon. But design corruption in religion is shattering to the very foundation of human aspiration. It shocks and paralyzes the fundamental urges to sincerity. It weighs the human spirit with the hopelessness of his efforts to conquer imperfection. In other words, the physical mistakes are made by governments and politics such and such are bad enough. But that's on a human nature. But on the spiritual nature is even far more egregious, because simply it is we're all spiritual. And so the idea, as I said earlier, somewhat, I didn't go all the way into it, simply has to do with spiritual. We're here to make heaven within ourselves, meaning simply is that we're supposed to have our salvation here take place. And then we know that we are in heaven, not waiting to die to go to heaven. This is a misnomer, because what happens simply is if you didn't do the work here, you obviously are not going to go to heaven when you die. You will know when you do the work here that you are going to heaven, because you've been marked. You've been marked because you've done the work. You see, that's the way of how they misled people. Wait till you die and then you go to heaven. No, 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 no. It doesn't work that way, folks. Okay, because then what happens simply they'll have to reincarnate again and do it over again. Okay, and we've been here many times, folks. So don't worry about that. That's not the key. It's in the now here that we need to find out the truth. Let's continue here. Whether stupidity or sinister design proved to have been the cause of the loss of true original meaning must be left to the historical sequel to disclose, and whether the cause of the perpetuation of a rank superstition in the present day of alleged enlightenment is to be laid at the door of ignorance or conavity, or a combination of both, must likewise be determined as time moves on. It is certain that both the primitive and the present causes of neoscience are kindred, if not identical. It is the purpose of the present volume to set forth in the modern mind the extent of the wreckage which splendid ancient wisdom suffered at the hands of later incompetency. I don't know if I would say it's incompetency. I would say simply is that men chose to deceive their brothers and sisters to have power over them. It wasn't, I don't think it's to do with incompetent. But later on, once this happened, those that knew the truth chose to deceive others is the wicked thing. They chose to the letter of the law, chose the letter which is dead. And it is designed to accomplish this by setting up the sharp contrast between the present disfigurement and the past glory of the structure. This purpose entails the task of revealing for the first time the hidden meaning of the body of archaic scriptures by means of a clear and ludigate interpretation of their myths and allegories, fables and dramas, astrological pictographs, and numerological outlines. It will be at once seen to be a labor of no mean proportions to convert the entire mass of antique mythology and legend, biblical graph and cryptogram, from presumed childish nonsense into an organic corpus of transcendent scientific significance. It involves the reversal of that mental process which is the days of early Christianity operated to change myth and allegory in the first instance over to factual history. You see, there's the major twist. It was all myth and allegory. This came from the pagans. A lot of this came from the pagans, folks. And then what happened simply is they were called pagans simply because they were seen by the Christians as simply inept. They were stupid. Well, you can't. You're talking about some crazy stuff. We're looking at it in literal terms. You see, we've already got our theology straight here. Once saved, always saved. That type of thing. You see, looking down, and so they would call these people pagans as being inferior. You see, it's like someone puffed up and thinks they know it all, and they don't know anything. But they're so loud all the time that the crowd hears that and says, "Well, they must be right. They sound like authorities. They're in the buildings where God supposedly lives, which God doesn't live. You see there. This is how people were fooled. But anyway, that's the idea. The pagans are simply they're inferior. And I'm not saying the pagans knew everything neither, but most they were taught fables, and that's how it was just simply a jargon. There's the city talk. When you go on the streets of the cities, there's a jargon how they talk, and if you don't know that, you're completely clueless of what's going on, and they can talk about all this stuff right before you, and you have no clue what they're talking about. That's what I'm saying here. This is what's going on. These are allegories or fables and drama, so to speak. And what happens simply is that no one had a clue what they were talking about because they already been quote unquote brainwashed and told that simply what they had was the truth. You see. As third century ignorance converted mythical typology to objective history, this didn't take overnight. It took a couple hundred years, folks, for this to take place. There were some that fought back, which I've already talked about. mainly at the library at Alexandria. That's where basically the last stand, so to speak, of those, what we call the mystery school, or something of those who understood the true perspective of what was going on. The almost insuperable difficulty of the project will consist in demonstrating to an incomprehensible world mistaught for centuries and now fixed in weird forms of fantastic belief that the sacred scriptures of the world are 1,000 times more precious as myths than as alleged what we call history. It can only be done by showing that as myths they're illuminate and exalt the mind to unparalleled clarity, while as assumed history they are either nonsensical or inconsequential. But centuries of erroneous indoctrination have so warped and victimized the modern mind that the effort to restore the scriptures to their primitive mythical status will be met with the objection that the transaction will wipe the Bible and other sacred literature out of the realm of value altogether. So there's that fear, okay, we let go of this, there won't be anything left. We've got to hold on to literal interpretation. In the common mind, this would be to rob them of worth and significance otherly. So wretchedly has the ancient uses of the religious myth been misunderstood that the cry, quote, the Bible only a myth, end quote, will fall upon the popular ear with all the catastrophe force and finality of the tolling of the death knell. And no statement that words can phrase will stand as a more redoubtable testimony to the correctness of this estimate of the present stupefaction of modern intelligence concerning religious philosophy than just this reaction. Ridicule, contempt, and flat-out rejection will be the greeting according to the proclamation that biblical myth is truer and more important than biblical history. Our book, that is aims at nothing less than the full proof of this contention. It flies directly in the face of the awaiting scorn of common opinion on the point of issue. Yet, nothing is easier than to demonstrate that the Bible material taken as history is the veriest nonsense. Anyone with an analytical mind and imagination, which is part, the masculine and the feminine, here we're seeing analytical, the masculine, and imagination dealing with the feminine part, you see. To convert its narratives into realism can make it a laughing stock. The Voltaires, the Paines, the Ingersolls, and the Freethinkers have done this successfully enough, but having disproved it as history, they have not redeemed it as a spiritual mythology. The world awaits this work of interpretation, and only when it is supplied will the full force of the tragic humor of mistaken drama for history be grasped. So the loss of corruption of the philosophical interpretation of ancient scriptures precipitate the West into a dark ages. And a main factor in this disaster was general obscuration of intelligence concerning the myth. Catastrophe was made more readily possible because the rationale of the use of the myth in ancient hands passed from knowledge, not history, from knowledge. When the recondile suggested that this other myth was lost, the inner essence, or what we call esoteric wisdom, was dissipated away. The inner kernel of the corn, so to speak. The seed was eliminated. You see, you got to have a seed in order to grow something. You see, and that was all done away with, and then something else was thrown in the ground, and it never grew anything. It never brought spiritual truth. Philosophy died out, and bereft of its inner soul, the myth came to stand as the mere ghost of itself. So in other words, there's nothing to hold it up anymore. There's no scaffolding. With its hidden significance gone, it reads nonsense and caricature, and so it has stood till this day. The word connotes in the popular mind of the present something about equivalent to fairy tales, a fiction a little removed from a quote hoax, end quote, is something that is sheer fanciful invention. To declare a narrative formerly believed to be true, quote, only a myth, is to toss it out on the rubbish heap as a thing of no longer value. See, that's how the approach comes in. Oh, this is a little story. It's not important. It's like throwing it out to the wind. This attitude of mind towards the myth is in itself the sign and seal of the decadency of this age. For ancient Sadducees could hardly have assumed that any succeeding age would prove so obtruse as to take the outward form of spiritual allegories or factual occurrences, or suppose that their formulators believed them to be true objectively. To be true, they are fanciful creations entirely fictitious. They are fables of events which, as events, never happened. The aim was never at any time to deceive anybody. It was never imagined that anybody would ever, quote, believe, end quote, them. Nevertheless, myth was designed to tell truth of the last importance. Its instrument was fancy, but its purpose was not falsehood, but sublime truth. Outwardly, it was not true, but at the same time, it portrayed full truth. It was not true for its characters, end quote, but was true for all mankind. It was only a myth, but it was a myth of something. It used a false story to relate a true one. While it never happened, it is the type of all things that have happened and will happen. It is not objective history, but it involves the import and substance, the heart core of all human history. Such authors as Spengler and Lord Raglan, Raglan, have begun to see that the ancients regarded it of far less importance to catalog the occurrences of objective history than dramatize its inner spirit. The outward actions of humans are in the main trivial because they constitute in their end only a partial and inferior account of whole verity. Ancient literature aims at something infinitely higher and more universal. It strove to depict in the myths and dramas the eternal norms of life experiences, which would stand as true for all men at any time in evolution. The myths were cryptographs of the great design and patterns of human history, limiting and enlarge the truth that it is only fragmentary fashion brought to living enactment in giving set of historical circumstances. The myth is always truer than history. Only in eons will history have caught up with the myth, when it will have unfolded the entire design of the original mythology. Hegel indeed essayed to read the features of a grand cosmic design in a straggling line of actual events, but the myth already foreshadows the ultimate meaning of history. Such being the portentous function of the myth is the early stages of the life of humanity. It becomes in some degree apparent what blindness must have fallen upon the mental eye of practically a whole world to have blotted out is little more than a single century the knowledge of a thing or such vast utility. No matter how conclusively the data may prove the fact, it will probably remain forever incomprehensible to unstudied folks that whole bodies of ancient mythology and spiritual topology suddenly became metamorphously into alleged history. And because it ensued through sheer gaucheria and clumsy, glorious dumbness, it will have predicted rise on our horizon as the supreme folly of the ages. When in reality, when it is realized that an early gift of divine wisdom planted to aid the race fight through the exigencies of its historical evolution totally miscarried into tragic nonsense through the simple mistake of taking spiritual allegory for literal history. A humiliated world will find difficulty in ridding its memory of this preposterous splendor because it's hard to deal with this. This is like, this history, whole thing of this being myth, being history, it's like concrete or like stone. It's been edifices that is, and it's hard. It can't be broken because people have accepted it unless they die away and someone teaches them opposite of what they've been taught when new people are brought in. That's the only way. Deprived thus of a legacy of transcendent knowledge vouchsafed for its instruction, Western humanity has wound a tortuous path through dangerous terrain that the lost wisdom would have enabled it to avoid. It has been a journey made without the guiding light that has been given to render the road more easily passable. Civilization has floundered in the shoals of quicksands of ignorance, and its contemporary phase presents the strangest of spectacles, that of modern culture boasting its superiority over any antecedent one, yet admittedly guided in its ethical life by a book which it is now possible to affirm that not the most rudimentary sense of its message has ever been apprehended. The declaration can be made and supported that the Bible is still a sealed book. Yeah, it is a sealed book. No one knows they don't know what to see in it. Meaning seal, no one understands it. People think they understand it, but they don't. This study will vindicate that declaration by setting forth the hidden meaning of ancient scripture for the first time. Gross misinterpretation cannot be seen as such until its product has been set down alongside a true rendering. The crudeness and baseness of a literal and historical translation of the sense will only be brought into glaring light by being held up against a background of clarity and dignity of a true spiritual meaning. The promised interpretation is not predicated upon the path of a genius superior to that of accumulated scholarship and accumulate of centuries of religious students and theologians in Christendom. It was made possible purely by the discovery of clues and keys to the old scripture hidden deeply in the tomes of ancient literature, which had escaped the notice of the long line of exegetical inquiries. Its wonders and skepticism arise over the difficulty of understanding why discovery was made at this epoch and not in so long a time before. The answer is most probably to be found in the fact that the thousands who failed approach the study of ancient treasure tombs, that is, tomes in the Bible, other works, with an attitude of mind that made defeat inevitably, while success came finally through an attitude that, if it did not of itself guarantee victory, at least opened the door to it. This is an immense significance and carries a weighty moral connotation with it. With the scales fallen at last from the eyes of proverbial prejudice, it can be patiently enough seen that there was little chance of discovery of the critical burden of ancient books as long as scholars understood their tough study, with the ingrained and assurance that they were the products of primitive emphasization. Emphasis. Even this has the archaic values. Hold on just a second here. So it's about an hour I've been doing this, so we're probably going to stop at this point. I'm sorry, I put something here. I don't know why I typed out. This is A Lost Life by Alvin Kuhn, and for some reason it's typed that wrongly, saying it's boy. That's not correct. I don't know why these guys don't get their act together here. We're going to stop here. It's an hour, a little over an hour. This is called The Lost Light. We'll start at another section here, section 27 of this particular volume. As far as I see here, this is chapter 1. His chapters are not what I call short. That's okay. No big deal. We'll just get to it little by little. So we'll stop here at this point. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I hope that you have eyes to see and ears to hear. I wish you a good day. May you also have eyes to see, like I said, and ears to hear, but also recognize that you actually come from God. You are spirit, just living in this world in a flesh, in order for maybe to help you to distinguish what is true and what is false. Have a good day. Take care.